Chapter 6 of The Brighton Boys in the Radio Service. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tom Clifton. The Brighton Boys in the Radio Service by James R. Driscoll. Chapter 6 The Mystery of the Iron Cross. When Joe came back to consciousness it was with his head pounding terribly, and Lieutenant Mackinson bending over him, swathing his face with a cool, wet cloth, while Jerry and Slim, whom the lieutenant had awakened, were standing near by, one holding a basin of water, the other holding a bottle containing a liniment or lotion. "You've been done up pretty badly," said Lieutenant Mackinson, as Joe went through the painful motion of moving his head from left to right, letting his gaze take in the now lighted wireless room. "Yes," he answered with an effort. "Nothing serious, though, I guess." And then, full recollection coming to him, "Did he get away?" "Who?" asked the lieutenant quickly. "Who was it that beat you up so?" "I don't know," Joe answered. "I discovered him in the battery room. We fought in the dark." With the aid of the others he raised himself to a sitting posture, then stood up and walked rather unsteadily across the room, took a long quaff of cold water, and dropped heavily into Lieutenant Mackinson's Morris chair. At the same time he gazed for the first time at what he had been holding tightly clutched in his right hand ever since the knockout blow had been delivered. The other three also were staring at it in open amazement. "What is it?" asked Joe, as the lieutenant crossed the room and took the thing from him for a closer examination. "What is it?" Lieutenant Mackinson repeated. "Why, lad, this is a German Iron Cross. Tell us what happened here." With the young officer seated before him and his two pals standing at either side of his chair, Joe quietly, quickly, and as carefully as he could, gave them every detail of the occurrence, from the moment he had first heard sounds in the battery room to the time that the other man ran away and he lapsed into unconsciousness. While Joe was relating his story, the lieutenant examined and re-examined the Iron Cross, the bit of broken chain still attached to it, and the piece of brown woolen army shirt which the lad had torn away with it. As the latter finished, the young officer hurried into the battery room, accompanied by Slim, to make a survey there. In 10 minutes he returned, his face pale, his jaws clenched. "There must not be a word of this to anyone," he warned them. "I am going to report to the captain at once. Someone has been tampering with the batteries, and he had with him a portable wireless which he evidently intended to attach." "You're the original little discoverer, all right," said Slim, in open admiration, addressing Joe as the lieutenant hurried from the room. "And you certainly were game to take the beating you did." "Yes, he punished me some," Joe admitted, "but I got in a little work on him, too. The only trouble is that I'm afraid I didn't blacken an eye or break a jaw or otherwise do any damage that might be apparent and so lead to the fellow's discovery." "The nerve of it, though," broke in Jerry. "A German spy doubtless masquerading as an American soldier, and right here on a United States transport loaded with 1,500 soldiers and tons of guns and ammunition." "Yes," said Joe contemplatively, "that's the very serious part of it all. The 1,500 soldiers and tons of guns and ammunition." "Sh h!" Slim, who was standing nearest the door, had heard footsteps. A moment later the lieutenant reappeared, accompanied by the captain of the Everett. When the boys had been presented, the captain abruptly requested Joe to repeat every detail he had told Lieutenant Mackinson. As he did so the captain gazed compassionately upon his injuries. "And where is the instrument you discovered?" he asked of the lieutenant when Joe had concluded. The young officer stepped into the battery room, returning with a small but evidently powerful portable wireless transmitter and receiver. Exclaimed the captain, examining it carefully. "Of German make." "Exactly, sir," replied Lieutenant Mackinson, "and evidently quite new. Probably never used more than once or twice before." "This is very serious business," said the captain impressively, and then addressing Joe, "Did you get a look at the other man? Would you know him if you ever saw him again?" "No, sir, I did not even get a glimpse of him, but I thought, sir, that perhaps—" "Yes?" encouraged the captain in a kindly tone. "Go on with your suggestion." "I thought, sir, that if we could find the man aboard with his shirt torn in such a way this piece would fit, and especially if he had the other end of a chain in his possession, then it might be pretty definitely assumed that he was the man who was in the battery room." "The chain, perhaps," said the captain slowly, "although that seems doubtful. As to the shirt, no." and unbuttoning his jacket he produced from beneath it a torn and crumpled brown woolen shirt. "We found this about 20 feet from here as we were on our way," he continued. "It resembles, but is not, a regulation army shirt. It is of the same texture and color, but it differs in minor details easily discernible. It is my opinion that the man who wore this shirt bought it and wore it for this very purpose, so that if necessary he might discard it and still have the one which came to him through the quartermaster's department. We evidently have to deal with a very crafty enemy, and one as bold as he is unscrupulous." "Lieutenant, what do you make of his manipulations in the battery room?" "There is no doubt in my mind, sir," Lieutenant Mackinson answered, "that he was about to connect up this instrument and then hide it for future use where it could not easily be seen." "I believe you're right," said the captain. "And then what use did he intend to make of it?" "Evidently his intention was not a loyal or friendly one," the junior officer continued. "It would seem to me that his probable purpose was to divulge to German submarines our whereabouts when we came within their zone." Apparently the commander of the ship agreed with him, for he made no immediate answer. For several moments he remained in meditative silence, his brow wrinkled as though he were turning the whole thing over and over in his mind. "From the very fact that he wore such a garment," the captain said at last, "it would seem that this man is among the regularly enlisted men on the ship. However, that is by no means certain. There is this certainty, however: if he would go to such desperate lengths once, there is every possibility that he will do so again, only more cautiously than before, for now he knows that his presence on board is known. The most rigid investigation must be started at once, and for that, Lieutenant, I will require your assistance. Leave these young men in charge of the wireless room unless something unusual or in the nature of an emergency occurs. As for you, gentlemen," he continued, turning toward the three boys from Brighton, "you are commanded not to mention a single word about this whole occurrence to another soul. If anyone should question you with a seeming knowledge of what happened here tonight, report the matter to me at once." "Yes, sir," the three boys responded, saluting, and the captain departed, motioning Lieutenant Mackinson to accompany him. By this time Joe was stiff and sore in every joint. Jerry and Slim insisted that he retire immediately, and helped him off with his clothing. Nor was there any objection from Jerry, whose turn in the wireless room was to begin then and last until 1 o'clock in the morning, when Slim suggested that he would stay on with him, just to talk things over. "All right," said Jerry, "and then I'll stay on during your shift, until Joe relieves us in the morning. We can get a good sleep tomorrow, anyway." And so the long night began. The dull song of the engines far, far below became like a monotonous droning of giant bees, and the wash of salt water against the side of the ship was a constant recurring swash, swish, 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 as the vessel plowed on and on through the darkness toward the submarine zone and Europe, and the battlefields and the trenches and the men, millions of them, of the Allied armies. It was near midnight, and the boys had fallen silent. Jerry with the wireless headpiece over his ears, Slim standing near the porthole, gazing out at the lone swaying light that indicated the position and progress of the cruiser convoy on the port side. Suddenly Slim whirled around, his face pale, his muscles tense, and with a motion to Jerry signaled silence. As the latter removed the gear from his head, Slim tiptoed across the room to him. Placing his lips close to Jerry's ear, he said, "I thought I heard someone in the battery room. Listen." There was no doubt of it this time. Both boys heard the sound. It was of somebody softly feeling about, as though in doubt to his exact position. "Quick!" hissed Jerry in Slim's ear. "You get the captain and lieutenant. I'll wait here." And as Jerry disappeared through the room in which Joe was sleeping, so as not to give suspicion to the man in the battery room, Slim slid into Jerry's chair and centered every faculty upon listening to the almost inaudible movements in the next chamber. He could tell instinctively that the man was feeling about the walls with his hands, and not unnaturally recalling Joe's experience only a few hours before, it gave Slim a creepy sort of feeling. Then all sound ceased. Try as hard as he could not hear a thing. He rose from the chair and went closer to the intervening door. All was silent. A few seconds later the captain and lieutenant, accompanied by Jerry, came hurrying into the room. Without an instant's delay the captain turned the knob and they entered the battery room, switching on the light at the same time. Apparently not a thing had been touched, but the outer door was ajar. The lieutenant jumped to it and peered out, but no one was to be seen. He closed and locked the door and began an inspection of the batteries. "Everything seems to be all right," he said finally, and then, his eyes traveling to the table, he stopped short. "The wireless instrument!" he gasped. "It's gone!" "Where was it left?" the captain demanded sharply. "On that table there," Lieutenant Mackinson answered. "I placed it there myself, as you probably remember, just before we went out together." "I remember," the captain admitted. "That spy has been back," the junior officer continued. "Back in this very room after his instrument, and he intends to use it yet if he can." Chapter 7